Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome so much to this ELNA Webinar Week webinar. And it's about unpacking the complexity of the teaching profession. Our guest today is Anna Pons. Anna is a representative on behalf of the OECD. And the keynote is about the new OECD report, which was recently brought out. And it's about unpacking the complexity of the teaching profession. But the further understanding of the nature of teaching is critical because there's no other factor in the school that has a greater impact on students. But in this particular webinar, we are also going to zoom in on the role of school heads because school leaders have a critical role in navigating these factors, helping to create conditions that can enable teachers to excel their craft. I'm now going to give the floor to our guest, Anna Pons. Anna, you have your keynote, and please know that this is a recorded session. So if you want to say or speak, be aware of this. We have our microphones off. And if you want to have any question, please put it in the chat because I will stop Anna and put in your question when necessary. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Petra, for this introduction, and thank you very much as well to the whole ELNA network for inviting me to share some insights of the work that we've been doing together in the last 2 years, together with representatives from ministries, from research, as well as from practitioners, both school leaders and teachers. In the last 2 years at the OECD, we've been pioneering a very exciting new study that has focused on teaching. And the study is going to be published on the 3rd of April. We will be happy to share the invite to all of the audience in case they are interested in joining. But today I would like to share with you some of the highlights kind of in prime. But before that, if I may, there are some housekeeping rules that actually Petra has already walked us through. So we can start now with the presentation. So at the OECD, we've been working a lot about education and about teaching, trying to measure as much as we can every possible element that influences student learning and growth. One of the issues that remains still very hard to understand is teaching, and it's what is going on in classrooms. You might already be familiar with that notion of classrooms as being black boxes, which basically symbolizes that we know very little about what's going on in the classroom. But I think that in the last 10 years, 15 years, there has been a lot of effort to try to better understand classrooms and to try to better understand teaching practices. And the effort that we have done in the last 2 years to put everything together to better understand what is the state of play of teaching reflects that. We can all imagine what a classroom looks like, but it's actually very hard to understand what are the key actions that the teacher or the key movements that the teacher makes that make a difference to students. There is a lot that is going on in the classrooms, and it's oftentimes very, very hard to capture that essence, those things that make a difference. And we've been looking into 5 different teaching goals to better understand those elements. Before delving into them, let me say a few more words of why we have done so. When we look into the latest PISA results that were published in December 2022, we actually ask students the extent to which they are familiar with some teaching and learning strategies that research has shown to be impactful. Like, for example, connect what they learn with what they know, to make sure that there are no mistakes, to ask questions, to be able to explain how a mathematical problem has been solved. And for many of these strategies that we would expect students to be familiar with and to be using it on a regular basis, students reported that they are not making such great use of it. And that raised the question of why there is this disconnection between what we know from research that might work and what students report that they do in the classroom. And what we have tried to do in these last 2 years is bring together the evidence from research and as well as the experience from the classroom and from schools about how are these practices being implemented and what makes a difference in the implementation of them. To do that, we've actually built a network, the Schools Plus network, that ESHA is part of, but also many other governments and organizations are part of, and that is trying to make that connection between policy, research, and practices. We have more than 50 organizations that have actually given us feedback and steer our work, and we are very proud with the participation of ESHA, because ESHA has also been part of our informal advisory group that has given us even more advice in a more frequent manner. And for us, it was very important to make sure that the school leaders will be well represented in this network. One of the main aspects that for us, that in doing this work was important, is to try to overcome these dichotomies that have traditionally kept us aside, because there are some fans of traditional methods and other fans of more innovative pedagogies or teaching approaches. What we have tried to do is actually to focus on 5 key teaching goals that will be relevant for all teachers, no matter their subject, no matter their grade level, and no matter their pedagogical beliefs. These 5 key teaching goals are ensuring cognitive engagement, crafting quality subject content, providing socio-emotional support to students, fostering classroom interaction, and using formative assessment and feedback. And more than whether one method or the other one is more appropriate, what research tells us is that there is no single bullet of what works. And what matters is that teachers, that the school leaders ask themselves when, where, how, and for whom each practice might work. And for example, when students are seeing new content for the first time or struggling to understand a particular issue, explanations or modeling might be more effective than other more active learning strategies. Whilst, for example, when students already master some of the contents, then more student active learning approaches might be more relevant. But at the end of the day, it's the professional judgment of the teacher what makes a difference and what has to be at play in order to make that decision. I was saying that we've looked into these 5 key teaching goals, but we've actually gone a bit deeper and tried to look into specific practices within these goals. And we have looked into a total of 20 practices. You can see here in the screen all the practices that we have looked into, and of course in the report you will be able to see more of them. The first thing that we did is actually to try to get a better understanding of how much we know about the impact of these practices. What is the strength and the weakness of the current research, the rigorous research that is available for each of them. And as you can see here in the screen, there are some practices like feedback or learning goals that have been well researched for many years in many educational settings and for many different subjects. We know a lot about the impact of setting clear learning goals, about the impact of providing constructive and timely feedback to students. But there are other practices like, for example, facilitating first-hand experiences or building relationships with the students where the research is still growing. There is already considerable evidence on the impact, but how this impact takes place, it's something that we still don't know that much about. So what we did is that for each of these practices, and you can see here an example of ensuring appropriate levels of challenge, which is part of the teaching goal, ensuring cognitive engagement. For each of these practices, we actually, together, all of these 50 organizations, as well as all the expert schools that have participated in this work, as well as the experts that have participated in this work. Together, we drafted a common definition so that we could make sure that we understood that practice in the same way. You can see here the definition as an example for ensuring appropriate levels of challenge. And then we asked the experts, what is the best available evidence for this practice? And we reported on that best available evidence. But the most exciting part of all this work that we've done in these last 2 years is that actually we engaged directly with over 150 schools from 50 different countries that are expert schools that are playing a role in the system in participating in research studies or disseminating research or evaluating practices to actually try to better understand how each of these practices is implemented, what are the key decisions that the schools, that teachers make in implementing these practices. So for example, in this example of ensuring appropriate levels of challenge, one of the key decisions to be made in terms of the structuring of the challenge is how to choose the right level, how to pitch that right level, and how to structure it in a graduality that works for students. Another important decision is what is the role of students in that practice. Are students, for example, asked to justify their thinking with evidence? And another important decision is what is the role of the teachers? To what extent teachers are giving guidance to students when they are struggling, for example, or they are instead preferring to ask students to persist in that challenge instead of helping them out of it. So basically, the schools that the teachers and the school leaders that have been engaged in this work from these 150 schools that I was mentioning have been working both individually and together to try to identify those key questions that can help guide the effective implementation of these practices. They have also shared their experience and their expertise on what they expect to observe in students when they effectively implement this practice. So for example, in this particular example, they reported that the students are engaged in the work and motivated to go beyond what they are expected to do when they feel that they are cognitively engaged at the right level. So they have been trying to define not only what are the critical decisions that have to be made and how they go about it, but also what is that they expect to see in students if they implement that in the most effective way. And they have also shared their thoughts about the challenge that it represents for school leaders to provide teachers with the most supporting environments to implement that practice at the highest potential level. So for example, when it comes to ensuring appropriate levels of challenge, one clear challenge for teachers is class size and composition. The larger the classes, the more diverse the composition, the most likely that there are more students at very different levels that need very different levels of challenge, and therefore the hardest for the teacher to articulate that practice. Similarly, opportunities for teachers to plan scaffolds, to plan support for students, as well as to think through about that graduality of the challenge and the progression of the students before the lesson, as well as opportunities to monitor students' learning and to ensure that they have acquired those levels, can also help make sure that the teacher has enough space to ensure that each student is challenged at the right level. So as you can see, this is just an example, just to show you that these 150 expert schools that have worked together in the last 2 years have gone really to the nitty-gritty of the details of how these practices are implemented, trying to share their expertise, and for the first time, building a global public good, a global collective schools expertise on how these practices, or some key considerations on how these practices are implemented. This has been a huge and very important work, and we are definitely very grateful to all those schools that have participated. And this very important work has also help in better understanding the complexity of teaching and the complexity of practices. Oftentimes we say classrooms are black boxes, teaching is complex, kind of opening the door to say there is nothing that can be done. Whilst in reality, if we know that it's complex, what is important is to understand what is that it's complex and to try to break down that big mountain of complexity to understand how to actually support our teachers in moving forward. So one of the things that the schools have, that the participating teachers and school leaders have done is provide us an indication of what is the level of difficulty for the teacher of enacting a practice, what you see in the vertical axis, as well as to what extent a more supportive or less supportive environment can make a difference to implement that practice, which is what you see in the horizontal axis. So what you see, for example, is that practices like ensuring appropriate levels of challenge, which we were just discussing in the previous slide, is one of the most challenging practices that for teachers. It's one of the most difficult things to do as a teacher, whilst at the same time, the influence of the school environment, the influence of the classroom factors that are outside of teacher controls is the highest. So it's even the most experienced teachers are likely to struggle with this type of practices. Whereas, for example, other practices, like, for example, setting learning goals, which you see on the bottom left of this chart, are among what we could call the easiest, even if, of course, there is nothing easy in teaching, which basically means that it's not as difficult, and no matter how big are the classrooms, how diverse are the classrooms, this is likely to be doable. And additional to this, we have also asked schools and school leaders, how would you go about supporting teachers to improve each of these practices? And sometimes when we think about professional development, it all seems a big bucket, a big blanket approach where everyone gets a bit of the same. Whilst what we have seen was that it seems that it's important to understand what is the type of practice to be improved in order to be able to provide teachers with the right support to improve that particular practice. So, for example, the practices that are most challenging, they are probably most challenging because they are embedded in a particular context and setting in the classroom. And to improve those type of practices, classroom observation, opportunities to research and reflect on their own practice, opportunities to collaborate with colleagues on tangible examples, or mentoring from more experienced colleagues is probably the best way to go, because this includes this element of practicality and tangibility of how to respond to those particular classroom challenges and situations. Other type of practices might benefit from opportunities to reinforce some foundational content knowledge, or be up to date with scientific knowledge, or better understand classroom dynamic or classroom management. So one of the key messages there, which is that instead of simply thinking of professional learning as one blanket approach for everyone, to really try to understand what are the specific practices that could be improved and what are the best ways to improve each of these practices. And even more excitingly, the school leaders and teachers that participated in this huge effort also identified what are the elements of school level policies that have an influence on teaching. And some of these are often thought as in a separate way and not necessarily as having a huge influence on the teachers, but they all have an impact on teachers. And what I would like to do, if we still have 5 minutes, is walk you through some of the reflection questions that they have shared for each of them. So, for example, one important element that school leaders mentioned that has an influence is the opportunities for teachers to understand the learners, to really have a very good grasp of each of their students. And for that, they suggested some questions that might help school leaders reflect about how they go about it and how they support their teachers in doing so. Like, for example, trying to schedule considerable activities on time at the beginning of the year in particular to facilitate that connection between teachers and students. Second question is, what is the role of a student voice, and to what extent a student voice can help challenge teachers, can help teachers refine their practice in a way that it's not destructive, that is not destructive, but in a way that it's actually constructive and that provides an additional support to move forward? Or what are the differentiated strategies to actually try to reach the hardest to reach parents, those that do not normally come to the meetings when they are called in? And given that we know that the parental influence is also it's also a key factor on a student's performance, how can we actually keep all those parents that are more challenging to reach informed, and how can we actually extend a school beyond the hours in a way that is supportive for everyone? Another area where school leaders and teachers share their thoughts was on the allocation of teachers to learners. In there, some of the questions that were raised were, how does the school respond to the challenges of large class sizes? Because as their large class sizes have or impose a limitation to the use of some practices, whether there are ways around this or where there is an awareness that if the classes are very large, some practices might be more challenging. What are the types of support and resources that are provided to help teachers in managing diverse learning needs? And what are the specific activities that teachers use to build those quality relationships with their students, even when time is limited or student numbers are high? So of course, there is a limit to what the school leaders can do and can decide, because many of these questions also relate to what is the level of resources that are available in schools. Another important area that the participating schools discussed was the importance of delineating what, when, and where a student learns, because of course this also has an impact on the quality of the practices that are used in the classroom. So some reflection questions there included, how are learning spaces organized to support teachers in the use of some practices? These might be particularly relevant, for example, for practices like project-based learning or first-hand experiences or student collaboration that need certain arrangements or settings in order to be put in place, or that might need even some interdisciplinary. Another important question was, how are teachers supported in the selection or design of instructional materials and tools for the lessons? Are they left on their own, or there are materials that are built at the school level to ensure that they are appropriate and relevant for the school context? Or to what extent they have access to other databases of materials that can help them in preparing the lessons and ensuring that the materials are at the right level of challenge for each and every student? Another important question that they raise is, to what extent, how is the school day and the lessons, as well as the school weeks and the overall school planning structure in order to facilitate teachers to actually ensure that the students are engaged and that there is enough time for those practices that might require more time? And for example, here, one of the challenges that many teachers are facing right now is keeping students engaged. And there has been some discussion on whether it might be better to reduce the lesson time and then to put some play or off time, and then so structure the learning day in a different way to make sure that students are engaged throughout. Because otherwise it's very hard for teachers to keep students engaged. In particular, what are the synergies and how are these planned among the professionals in the school to make sure that, for example, students don't go through 5 or 6 hours of drilling whilst there is this combination of lessons that might be more active, lessons that might be less active, to make sure that there is good structure and combination of both that is actively engaging for all of students. Another area where school leaders and teachers suggested to reflect on when thinking about instructional leadership and supporting teachers at the schools to be able to make use of a broader range of practices in the most effective way is to think carefully about the opportunities for professional planning and collaboration. And in particular, what are the structures that can help enable quality planning time, both at the individual level and collaborative with colleagues, to make exactly what I was describing possible? What are the methods that can actually foster collaborative reflection and inquiry among teachers to improve their practices? And whether there are any specific in-school initiatives to ensure teachers and leaders engage with learning opportunities, despite that there are always more urgent and important things to do, seemingly. And actually here, just on a little bracket, we ran a survey at the OECD, which is called the TALIS survey, and the new results are going to be available this autumn. And we asked school leaders what is one of the most impactful things to student learning. And what comes to the top, or second to the top, is actually the time for instructional leadership. But then we asked them, how much of your time do you spend on instructional leadership, on supporting teachers to improve their practices? And they tell us that it's just 16%. So certainly heavy workloads and other distractions are a limitation to professional collaboration and planning, but it is an area that was also suggested of great importance. Another important area was to think carefully as well of the school vision and ethos, because the extent to which there might be shared values and routines across all teachers might make it easier to then be more effective in the classroom, because the same routines and expectations hold across lessons. So there is consistency for students, and it's easier to then move directly or more quickly into substantive elements of the lesson, instead of spending more time defining how students are going to split into groups, or what are the different rules and steps to get there. So questions around there is how are staff and students, as well as the wider community, engaged around that vision on teaching and learning in the school? What are the strategies to ensure that these elements, for example, of classroom management or student behavior, are held across the different classrooms and professionals, and whether there are some routines that are developed across the schools? Another important area was, what is the role of data and research to drive improvements? What are the tools that are available at the school level to make it easier for teachers to monitor where are students in their learning? Whether there is any approach at the school level to identify early on those students that are at risk, that might be struggling in one lesson, in one subject, but also in other subjects, so that these are identified earlier. And how are teachers and school leaders supported to stay up to date with more broadly what research is, what new research findings are suggesting in terms of the effectiveness or how to deal with those classroom challenges. And finally, another area that was highlighted of importance for reflection and where school leaders can play an important role was actually in connecting classrooms and schools with other learning environments. So basically, whether teachers can tap into local community resources for some practices. This might be particularly important, for example, for practices like project-based learning or first-hand experiences, where having access to other community resources, like whether it's a museum or a library or a garden, can facilitate such experiences. Whether there are connections with other networks or stakeholders that can help teachers in their learning and refining of teaching methods, and whether teachers and the school also has access to a digital community that provides this ongoing support for improvement, because at the end of the day, classrooms might look very different, schools might look very different, but they are all working towards the same goal everywhere. So these are some of the highlights of the report, and I would like to stop here to make sure that we have enough time in case that there is any questions. So back to you, Petra.
That was a wonderful, yeah, I would almost say sneak preview on the report that is going to come out. I would really like to ask participants, if you have a question, put it in the chat, or maybe if you want to open your microphone, you can request so. When I hear you saying some things about leadership, Anna, this educational leadership, I think you tear it apart in the part of instructional leadership that really needs our attention. It's most effective, and actually only a few moments of the time of school heads are dedicated to it, which is, I think, something we can really take up both in the policy and the agenda to actually work on the professional development of school heads. The other thing that I hear you say is, in fact, the strategic leadership where school heads have to set a vision, the ethos, but it also means that when they have this vision and mission, that they have to set goals and actually engage their team to share the ownership of these goals. I think the third one I took off was providing opportunities for actually creating opportunities that teachers can have collaborative professionalization. This is also something that can be done in the school and with the team. So I see it as a very important task for school heads to actually take this up. And the last one mentioned that I think is very easy to take into the school is the research part, because school heads should actually create this professional learning community. And this requires an attitude, but it may also ask from policymakers to create the possibility, because academic teachers, especially in primary, are not common yet. Now, I don't see any questions in the chat, but could you elaborate on it? How easy actually is, well, sometimes we say the fruit in the tree that can be reached so easily. What could be the easy things that we could start tomorrow with school heads to improve actually the teaching profession?
Thanks, Petra, for sharing your reactions. And indeed, I think that there is no other element that research has found to have a greater impact on student learning, as you were saying in the beginning of this conversation, as teachers. So really trying to better understand as much as possible the teachers that school leaders are working with, I think it's what is critical. Trying to understand means not only understanding the behaviors and motivation of these teachers, and I think well, they're doing quite a good. School leaders are doing quite a good job in creating those engaging communities at the school level. When we look at data from our survey, teachers share that they are proud of teaching, that they are fully committed to their job. So this means that the school leaders are creating an exciting working environment and are building these communities in a school. Of course, there are issues of well-being, and of course, there are issues of demotivation. But what I want to say here is that not only it's about ensuring that teachers are motivated, but also this opportunity, for example, to do classroom observation, which is something that very, very few of the teachers and school leaders that responded to the TAVIS survey said that they do on a regular basis, and using a framework. That's something that we know from research that can make a huge impact on teachers. We know that teachers that receive feedback say that they are more motivated, that they have concrete suggestions for improve, and that they feel more confident in their work. So this is something that, whilst receiving feedback sometimes can be painful, what teachers say is that they appreciate these opportunities because it's an opportunity for them to get recognized, and it's an opportunity for them to take their work even further. So what I would say is that one way forward tomorrow is, if the school is not doing classroom observation yet, try to find your best teachers. Start with those that you think that could provide the best examples and ask them whether they want to open their classroom doors to other teachers so that they come and observe them and learn from them. Organize discussions around the teaching. Not any particular teacher, not a particular person. No one wants to be openly criticized. Just focus on the teaching and try to spur that professional dialogue that can help everyone grow, because probably every teacher has something to gain from that discussion. So that's kind of what I would say in short. I see.
Well, some questions are coming in.
Questions. There was one that was so I'm not sure you've seen it, but it's from Angeline, and she's asking what constitutes a large class size, whether it's 30 or more. And what I would like to say here is that class sizes are very variable. And for example, in a video study that we did in 2020, we saw that in Shanghai, for example, teachers are dealing with class sizes of 60 sometimes, but they have far more opportunities and time to plan those lessons ahead of time. So indeed, the larger, there is no specific threshold number, but basically the larger the class size, the more important is the time for teachers to plan the lesson ahead and to ensure that there are enough materials to be able to cater to all the diversity of the students that they will have in front of them.
And yes, I will read you some more questions. The first question that came in was, thank you, Anna. I was also wondering about the OECD Teaching Compass. Would you know what it will entail and how collaborative leadership aspects will be included? Then there was a question, do you consider the task for school leaders foster collaborative reflection a part of instructional leadership, or is it something else or something new? And the last question that I see here is, how do we support and guide our teachers to deal with all the challenges they have every day in their classroom and succeed learning? So 3 questions for the last round, Anna.
Thanks. And they are all they're all challenging in their own way. Just to start with Monica Huang. Monica is actively referring to a new OECD resource that is being developed that is called the Teaching Compass. And this basically follows a previous resource that was developed. It's called the Student Compass. Now, when you see the upcoming Schools Plus report, which I have just presented, you will see that those observed effects on students of each of these practices have been linked to this Student Compass, which is basically providing the notion of where students going in 2030, 2040. So it's providing that future orientation of where do we want to go, where do we want to be in 10 years' time. That's exactly the same goal of the Teaching Compass. It's not focusing on the teachers of today, it's focusing more on the teachers of not even tomorrow, but the year after tomorrow. So providing that future perspective. And certainly collaborative leadership, it's a key aspect of that future of the teaching profession. Franz Grove is asking about the task of school leaders in fostering collaborative reflection and whether that's part of instructional leadership. Here we are getting into definitions, and I'm not sure I'm the best to delineate what is what, but certainly that role of school leaders in supporting the growth of their staff is critical. You can call it instructional leadership, you can call it creating professional learning communities, you can call it, or actions might be that every teacher has an individual learning and progression plan. It might be applied in different ways. There might be many different initiatives that are part of that role of a school leaders in fostering, in creating a working environment where every teacher pulls and supports each other to actually grow. And we all know that the distributed leadership and the role of leadership, it's something that has undergone many changes in the last 20 years, we think that it's probably time to actually further reflect on it to ensure that we define well what is that school leaders do, and we recognize the school leaders well for their important work and the stress that goes with it. But indeed, all those roles that are linked to actually creating the conditions for teachers to refine their practice, it's something essential that should exist in every school. We also had another comment from Efticia. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it well, but it has to do with how do we support and guide our teachers to deal with all the challenges they have every day in their classrooms and succeed in learning. This is very, very, very challenging. What I would say, if I had to name two opportunities that we actually have data for and that research have indicated as being key to support teachers, one is mentoring. Across the TALIS participating countries, only 22% of teachers report having a mentor, whilst we know that having a mentor can help teachers not have to reinvent the wheel or feel alone in front of a problem, but actually having access to someone that they can trust, that they meet on a regular basis, and that can help them grow. And we know from research that this is particularly important for new teachers that are the ones that might feel more overwhelmed. And the other one that I will mention, and I've already presented before, it's classroom observation. This can be really key for teachers because they themselves can see teaching in action and make decisions on the basis of their own judgment, their own professional judgment about what they can learn and what they can model from other teachers. I see there is one more comment coming in from Stig Johansson. Petra, do we have time to take it? Yeah, okay. So Stig is saying open for learning is an approach where the leader is challenged to examine their own preconceptions and engage in dialogue with a genuinely learning-oriented mindset. This is a way of practical leadership that you have some reflection to. Indeed, I think all the key words that you are putting in there are words that are used in all the approaches that relate to learning and growth. This openness, this trust, this understanding that there is always something that can be learned, even if teachers might have spent 20 or 30 years already in classrooms and on different schools. That openness is critical to growth, and that growth-oriented mindset is something that we've also tried to measure when it comes to students. And what we see is that there is a relationship between the performance of the students in PISA and the extent that there is a growth-oriented mindset. Research that has been done on teachers is also pointing to the importance of teachers having a growth mindset for all of their students. I know that here you're more thinking about teachers and their expectations and their opportunities for refining their methods and their own growth. That's something I would like to emphasize as well, is that it's important as a school leaders to think about how to ensure that every teacher has a growth mindset on their own students, because if there are low expectations for some students or for some classes, that might actually be hindering learning in that particular class, and that's something that the school leaders have a role to play in too.
Well, we are coming to an end, Anna. I think all of us could be listening to you for at least one more hour. And when the report emerges in April, I'm sure, when the report comes out in April, I'm sure that there will be a lot of sessions also through OECD where we can discuss a little more. I'm very proud that you were with us on behalf of the Educational Leaderships Network Europe, ELNE, and of course ESHA, and we are very pleased that we can work together on this important topic. As conclusion, I would say maybe it's time that we also make the European School Leaders Agenda not only a teacher's agenda, because they are so much linked. that if we really want to enhance education and make, well, maybe school leaders understand the teaching and learning, because in a way, I feel like school heads have something to learn about teachers as well, and it's not only one way around, then I hope in the future that we can do something together on a European level and then bring that back to the national levels. And maybe in a kind of lemniscat, we can have a development on school leadership as well. Anna, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, participants and the future participants that will watch this webinar. I hope it was a good contribution to the professionality of all of us. Thank you and goodbye.